Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together so that we can collectively immerse ourselves in wisdom of Torah and find not only wisdom, but find ourselves there as well. We're in Parshat Yitro, which is in the book of Exodus, chapter 18, beginning with verse 1. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute, together we can recite our blessing, giving thanks for the opportunity of this moment together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher
Kiddushanu
b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah.
Hine ma tovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, hine ma tov. Ya la 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 la. Hine ma tov, hine ma tov. Ya la 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 la. How good and how pleasant it is for us to dwell together as brethren around your shulchan, Rabbi.
Yashikoth, thank you so much. Thank you. Beautifully said, beautifully sung. Thank you, Mark. We'll begin by, we've begun in fellowship and friendship and song. And so now we'll read our English translation of our Torah portion. And then I'll share with you a little bit of a focus study, and then we'll have our collective and collaborative conversation about it. So chapter 18, verse 1. Jethro, priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, God's people, how God had brought Israel out from Egypt. So Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after she had been sent home, and her two sons, of whom one was named Gershom, that is to say, I've been a stranger in a foreign land, and the other was named Eliezer, meaning, the God of my father was my help, and God delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought Moses' sons and wife to him in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. He sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her two sons. Moses went out to meet his father-in-law. He bowed low and kissed him. Each asked after the other's welfare, and they went into the tent. Richard, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 8?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Moses then recounted to his father-in-law everything that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardships that had befallen them on the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. And Jethro rejoiced over all the good that the Lord had done to Israel in delivering them from the Egyptians. Blessed be the Lord, Jethro said, who delivered you from the Egyptians and from Pharaoh, and who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, yes, by the result of their various schemes against the people. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices for God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to partake of the meal before God with Moses' father-in-law.
Thank you. And then David and Susan, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 13?
Yes, Rabbi, thank you.
And it happened on the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood over Moses from the morning till the evening. Is that where we are?
Yes.
Yeah.
And Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people. And he said, what is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why are you sitting alone while all the people are poised over you from morning till evening? And Moses said to his father-in-law, for the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have some matter, it comes to me, and I judge between a man and his fellow, and I make known God's statutes and his teachings.
And Moses' father-in-law said to him, the thing that you're doing isn't good. You'll be worn out, both you and this people who are with you, because this thing is too heavy for you. You won't be able to do it by yourself. Now listen to my voice and I'll advise you, and may God be with you. You be for the people toward God, and you will bring the matters to God, and you will enlighten them with the laws and the instructions, and you'll make known to them the way in which they'll go and the thing that they'll do. And you will envision out of all of the people worthy men who fear God, men of truth, who hate bribery, and you'll set chiefs of thousands, chiefs of hundreds, chiefs of 50s, and chiefs of 10 over them. And they'll judge the people at all times, and it will be, they'll bring every matter that is big to you, and they will judge every matter that is small, and make it lighter on you, and they'll bear it with you. If you'll do this thing, and Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh will command you, then you'll be able to stand, and also this entire people will come to its place in shalom.
Thank you both so much. Mark Thompson, would you like to read a little bit, starting at verse 24?
Yes, thank you. Moses heeded his father-in-law and did just as he had said. Moses chose capable men of all Israel and appointed them heads over the people, chiefs of thousands, hundreds, 50s, and 10s. And they judged the people at all times. The difficult matters they would bring to Moses, and all the minor matters they would decide themselves. Then Moses bade his father-in-law farewell, and he went his way to his own land. On the third new moon after the Israelites had gone forth from the land of Egypt, on that very day, they entered the wilderness of Sinai. Having journeyed from Rephidim, they entered the wilderness of Sinai and encamped in the wilderness. Israel encamped there in front of the mountain, and Moses went up to God. Adonai called to him from the mountain, saying, "This shall you say to the house of Jacob and declare to the children of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to me. Now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples. Indeed, all the earth is mine, but you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the children of Israel."
Thank you so much, Mark. June, would you like to read a little beginning at verse 7?
Thank you, Rabbi. Moses came and told to the elders of the people and set before them all these words which the Lord commanded him. And all the people answered together and said,
20.
all that the Lord hath spoken, we will do. And Moses reported the words of the people unto the Lord. And the Lord said unto Moses, Lo, I come unto thee in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with thee, and may also believe thee forever. And Moses told the words of the people unto the Lord. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go unto the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments, and be ready against the third day. For the third day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. And thou shalt set bounds unto the people round about, saying, Take heed to yourselves, that ye go not up into the mount, or touch the border of it. Whosoever touches the mount shall be surely put to death. No hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or shot through, whether it be beast or man, it shall not live. When the ram's horn soundeth long, they shall come up to the mount.
Thank you so much, Jude. Jim, would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 14?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Moses came down from the mountain to the people and warned the people to stay pure and they washed their clothes. And he said to the people, "Be ready for the third day. Do not go near a woman." On the third day, a morning dawned. There was thunder and lightning and a dense cloud upon the mountain, and a very loud blast of the horn. And all the people who were in the camp trembled. Moses led the people out of the camp toward God, and they took their places at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was all in smoke, for for Adonai had come down upon it in fire. The smoke rose like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled violently. The blaze of the horn grew louder and louder. As Moses spoke, God answered him in thunder. Adonai came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and Adonai called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Adonai said to Moses, "Go down, warn the people not to break through to the Adonai to gaze, lest many of them perish. The priests also who come near Adonai must stay pure, lest Adonai break out against them." But Moses said to Adonai, "The people cannot come up to the Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, 'Set bounds about the mountain and sanctify it.'" So the Lord said to him, "Go down and come back together with Aaron, but let not the priests or the people break through to come up to Adonai, lest he break out against them." And Moses went down to the people and spoke to them.
Thank you so much. And Dave, with Mount Sinai behind you, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at the start of chapter 20?
God spoke all these words, saying, "I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods besides me. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image or any likeness of what is in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am an impassioned God, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children, upon the third and upon the fourth generations of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not swear falsely by the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not clear one who swears falsely by his name."
Thank you so much, Dave. Robin, would you like to read a little bit at verse 8?
Yes, thank you. "Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of your God Adonai. You shall not do any work, you, your son or daughter, your male or female slave, or your cattle, or the stranger who is within your settlements. For in 6 days Adonai made heaven and earth and sea, and all that is in them, and then rested on the seventh day. Therefore Adonai blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it."
Thank you so much, Robin. Let me invite Margot if you'd like to read a little bit at verse 12. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you. "Honor your father and mother, that you may long endure on the land that the Lord your God is assigning you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female slave, or his ox, or his ass, or anything that is your neighbor's."
Thank you, Margot. Let me invite Robert if you'd like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 15.
Yes. Now, mine 15 says, "Thou shalt not steal." Mine would pick up where 18 is.
Okay,
And all the people, and if I'm not correct, you correct me.
you're right.
And all the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings and the noise of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. And they said unto Moses, "Speak thou with us, and we will hear. but let not God speak with us, lest we die. And Moses said unto the people, fear not, for God is come to prove you, and that his fear may be before your faces, that ye sin not. And the people stood afar off, and Moses, let me find my place again, and Moses drew near unto the thick darkness where God was.
Thank you so much, Robert. And then Robert Walkman, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 19?
Sure. Thank you, Rabbi. The Lord said to Moses, thus shall you say to the Israelites, you yourselves saw that I spoke to you from the very heavens. With me, therefore, you shall not make any gods of silver, nor shall you make for yourselves any gods of gold. Make for me an altar of earth and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your sacrifices of well-being, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be mentioned, I will come to you and bless you. And if you make for me an altar of stones, do not build it of hewn stones, for by wielding your tool upon them, you have profaned them. Do not ascend my altar by steps, that your nakedness may not be exposed upon it.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. This is our entire Torah portion for the week. I'd like to share with you a little bit of a focused study of it, and then we'll open it up for our collective conversation. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out now. And the painting that's at the very top of the study sheet is a self-portrait by Vincent van Gogh, a self-portrait with a gray felt hat. I believe he painted this about 3 years before his death. And we'll come back to what it is about this particular painting that intrigued me as an entry point into our exploration of this week's study session, which I've entitled Learning to Paint. And we begin by looking at a verse that we're actually going to encounter in about 4 weeks' time in Parshat Yitro. And Yitro is that portion where Moses, having smashed the first set of tablets because he has come down from Mount Sinai and he sees the people dancing around an idol of a golden calf that they have made with the assistance of Aaron while Moses was up on top of Mount Sinai. And having smashed the first set of tablets and Moses having asked God to please forgive the people, God then says, okay, make a second set of tablets and you inscribe upon them these words, which I'll share with you. So this is from that Torah portion from Exodus chapter 34, verse 27. God said to Moses, write down these matters, these devarim, for on the basis of Al-Pi, these matters, I make a covenant with you and with Israel. Now we're going to move into a little bit of a difference of opinion between two rabbis that appears in the Talmud in the volume Gittin about exactly what constitutes Torah in a sense. And they're going to be playing, at least one of them is going to be playing with the phrase Al-Pi, which indeed is an adverb that means on the basis of or because of, but we're going to see how the Hebrew plays into a different way of understanding what constitutes Torah. So this is the section from Masechet Gittin. Rabbi Elazar says, the majority of Torah was transmitted in writing, while the minority was transmitted orally. As it says in the prophet Hosea, I wrote for him the greater part of my Torah. Rabbi Yochanan says, the majority of the Torah was transmitted orally, while the minority was transmitted in written form, as it is stated in Exodus chapter 34, for on the basis of Al-Pi, these matters, I have made a covenant with you and with Israel. So our first rabbi, Rabbi Elazar, seems to have a very good proof text indicating that Most of Torah was written down because it says so in Prophet Hosea. I wrote from the greater part of Torah. Rabbi Yochanan plays with the Hebrew that was in the verse from Exodus that we read in number 1, the phrase al pi, and the word al pi, the word pi is built from the word peh, which means mouth. And so Rabbi Yochanan says, oh, it's because of what came out of the mouth that this covenant is being made. It's on the basis of what was transmitted to you orally that I've made a covenant with you. So from that, Rabbi Yochanan says, what's most important, most significant, most substantial in Torah is that which was transmitted orally. So the written Torah, you can say, is that which is unchangeable. Once you write it down, it's there forever, it's immutable, it's clear, it's concise, and it's contained. Whereas the oral Torah in our tradition is the product of dynamic debate among rabbis who in a sense are mediating between the unchanging and the ever evolving. They are trying to negotiate between what apparently has been stated and decreed at one time, and they're trying to apply it to ever-changing circumstances. So there's this tension between that which was decreed before us and from above, and that which is the product of human insight that's been applied to current situations. So we're going to explore a little bit more of this bit of tension if you turn over the study sheet. And we'll have, again, 2 different points of view about not only what constitutes Torah, whether it is permanent and unchanging, having been written down, or whether it's evolving as in the course of discussions over the course of time among human beings. And so this is 2 different sets of understandings of what happened at this moment that we just read, what happened at Mount Sinai. And the first is from a Shabbat 88a in the Talmud. And that imagines God saying to the Israelites, if you accept the Torah, it will be well with you. But if not, here will be your burial site. So this image that appears in this reading from the Talmud has God being a very threatening presence. And it is in fact built upon some of the Hebrew that we read in this week's Torah portion, because where it describes the Israelites, my edition translated the verse as saying the Israelites are at the foot of Mount Sinai. But the actual Hebrew, tachat, there really means underneath. So there's commentary that's playing with this notion. What does it mean to be underneath Mount Sinai? And so some of the commentators, some of the early rabbis have this image of God lifting up Mount Sinai. And one interpretation of what it meant for God to be lifting up Mount Sinai is that God was threatening the Israelites. Look, either accept what I've just told you, or I'm going to drop this mountain on your heads. Rather threatening and intimidating. And now we're going to look at a very different sense of what was happening there at Mount Sinai. And this is from a late 16th or the 17th rabbi known as the Maharsha, who wrote, "For that is why the Torah was distributed to the 600,000 people in the desert, to be an all-inclusive Torah from every opinion and wisdom." So here the Maharsha is picking up another kind of counter narrative, if you will, about what happened at Mount Sinai. And he's picking up on threads that appear in early Midrash and earlier commentaries, which is that the notion that the Torah is not complete as a result of God's presentation to it in that moment. What makes it complete is that everyone was experiencing it, and everyone was experiencing some different aspect of what was happening in that moment. And it's only through the collective contribution of everyone's point of view, of everyone's perspective, of what everyone experienced, that we have a sense of the totality of Torah. So the first description of what happened at Mount Sinai is, if you will, a single entity, a single force. God is presenting this as a take it or leave it transfer, if you will. Whereas the second, this counter narrative, is saying what really is important, what really makes up Torah, is the fact that we all have a different sense of what it all means. And it's when we put it all together collectively that we have some sense of the totality of Torah. And so now we're going to turn back to our portion, and we're going to play out this notion about the significance of what the Maharsha is pointing us towards. And so this is number 3, and it's from chapter 20, verse 17, which we read just a few moments ago. Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid, for God has come only in order to test you." And the word there for test is nasot. Well, what does it mean to be tested? So this notion of testing and this word nasa, we've seen before, perhaps most dramatically in what's known as the Akedat Yitzhak, the binding of Isaac. And that's from book of Genesis, chapter 22, verse 1. God tested Nisa, Abraham. So what does it mean to be tested? Does it mean that someone is trying to see if you know the right answer? Does it mean that someone is trying to see if you qualify for entry into something? Does it mean that someone's trying to trip you up? Does it mean that someone doesn't believe in you and want to see how you're going to answer a question? So we're going to look at what Rashi says, the great medieval commentator, in response to Exodus chapter 20, verse 17, about don't be afraid, God has only come to test you. And Rashi says, what it means is in order to exalt you, to elevate you throughout the world. Nasot is an expression of elevation and greatness. What I think Rashi is here telling us about the notion of being tested, whether it was the testing of the Israelites at Mount Sinai or the testing of Abraham and at Mount Moriah, is that this kind of testing is a pressure for the purpose of bringing forth a new self. It's a pressure designed to give birth to something new. And so what is it, the new that's being brought into existence with the testing of Abraham? Well, it's elevating Abraham to yet a higher level of his encounter with God and his understanding that the way of God is to reject human sacrifice, which was so prevalent in the ancient world. It's to have a sense of compassion, that the only way forward is to have a sense of compassion. And here in our chapter 20, what does the testing of the Israelites mean? It is designed to bring forth from the Israelites their own birth as a new nation and as new beings. So this is very different than the notion of God presenting a take it or leave it matter with what God has proclaimed. It is, this is in a sense, it is, well, let's look at, and look at number 4 with our commentator, the Ha'amek Davar, who says, it is human spiritual greatness that is God's purpose in revealing God's self. So one way of perhaps understanding why God performed all these great wonders and did what was done at Mount Sinai with the thunder and the lightning and the fire, was either to display God's might, which would then cause people to be frightened and intimidated, and therefore to submit to this power that had the capacity to destroy them. That's one way of understanding what it meant for God to reveal God's self in all of God's power. But the Ha'amek Devar and Rashi are telling us, I think, pointing us in a different direction. They're saying that the Israelites have just been freed from Pharaoh. And what's about to happen here at Mount Sinai is not a substitution of one dictator for another, quite the opposite. What happens at Mount Sinai is part of the liberation struggle. And here, having been freed from the external constraints of Pharaoh and the might of Egypt, now what's happening at Mount Sinai is more of an internal liberation. It is an experience designed to free the people into becoming more initiative, more responsible, and to assume a willingness to, through all of their expressions, through all of their initiative, and through all of their opinions, through all of their orality, you might say, to be able to begin to be free people, not because they're no longer in physical external chains, but to free themselves to assume responsibility for their own lives. Here is what our contemporary commentator, Aviva Zornberg, writes in her book, The Particulars of Rapture. The purpose of revelation is to develop human qualities. What is enacted at Sinai is the revelation of the human being in larger range and strength. God comes at Sinai so that the human being may come fully into its own. So let's take a turn back and look at our Van Gogh painting. Vincent van Gogh was a deeply religious man, and early in his life, he aspired to be a preacher. And indeed, he gained a pastoral commission to preach to and to pastor to families in a mining community in Belgium. And apparently he failed miserably. And his failure wasn't so much in terms of his character and his desire to serve, but his failure was he wasn't a very good speaker. And so Van Gogh had initially tried to serve God and to express his love for fellow human beings and to bring a sense of the sublime and the comfort that one has from a sense of faith through the, if you will, normative, the typical, the conventional means, which is to be a pastor, a preacher. And he wasn't able to fulfill himself and wasn't able to serve others or God in that way. And he turns to art. And so when he switches his medium, if you will, from that of preaching, from that of speaking and preaching, and instead turns to painting, he unleashes something within himself, which is his true authentic self, the gift that he was born with, to see out in the world things that other people couldn't see and to be able to bring them onto a canvas. And here in this self-portrait of him, you see these, it is quite in some ways amazing and disturbing. It's amazing because the idea of having one's face consists of all these parallel lines of all these colors. It was an extraordinary imagining of what constituted one's physical self. And there in the background, you have these radiating lines of color, almost as if they are a halo. And it's disturbing because there, at least as I see it within his eyes, is some sense of desperation, perhaps, of deep longing that's perhaps frequently frustrated by a sense of isolation and difficulty, perhaps in connecting with others. But yet, here's what Vincent van Gogh wrote in a letter to his brother Theo, a letter, in fact, that was found on his body after he apparently killed himself. And in that letter, he said to his brother, "We cannot speak other than by our painting." For Van Gogh, perhaps, his painting was his way of speaking, his way of giving voice to what he encountered, what he experienced, his desire to make connections with others. That painting was his form of speaking. And it's our way of understanding that each one of us has our own unique way of speaking. And when we discover what that is, and when we develop it and we share it with others, we share with others some experience of the sublime, which achieves a sense of connection with one another. And with that, I'd love to open it up and hear what everyone has to offer, what your thoughts, reflections might be about this week's Torah portion. Anna?
Well, if you said the picture of Van Gogh was the lines, but look at his eye. It's a perfect circle, one of them more so than the other. And if you look at his left shoulder on the light pinkish purple color, there's a blue cross. It's a little cross there. And as far as eyes and seeing and things, verse 18 in chapter 20 says, so the people remained at a distance while Moses approached. What did he approach? The thick cloud where God was. Now, if you just took those words, the thick cloud where God was, it's pretty incredible, because we don't always think that when we're in a thick, dark cloud situation in our own mind or our own lives, that would be where God is. I like that. That's where God is.
Fabulous.
You can approach God in the thickest cloud.
That's lovely. Thank you. Which perhaps often, thank you. Thank you very much. Others, Paul, and then Mark Thompson.
Rabbi, thank you. What catches me is the word testing, and that which you remarked on. And, now Rashi, I don't know what's ever, he defines, in all the decades I spent at school, the word test did not lead to elevation and greatness. And I will defend that. If I go back between 7 o'clock and 7:15 today, when we were reading the text, and you read, it was just one sentence after another with when God talks about, it's always about, hey, you better be understanding who it is that I am. And the other guys, forget about them. It's me. So a test in my mind is, did you really understand what I just told you? And what he just told you is the word me, me, me. And so the reason I enjoy these weekly sessions is that I get turned away from the other stuff, because that was the basic stuff that I taught when I was in school way back when. This is really beautiful. And so I wish that sometimes that Rashi was really, he was always the God. He was always on the side, stuff like that. It was always great commentary. But I'm really having a tough time, because I just read something 15 minutes ago that seems to be a little bit different than what he's saying. And I just had one more question. The word gittin represents on the 60b, there was kedushin and there was gittin. Gittin is divorce. Is that what that is all about?
Yes, it's an entire section of Talmud about what does that mean to give a divorce. Yeah. Okay,
and somehow or other that was okay, but I really didn't want to deflect from my other comments.
Okay, so real quickly, this is fascinating, right? To get into our own experiences of what it means to be tested, it must mean there is a right answer. And my first year in rabbinic school, I had a Bible teacher who said, you know, when I first started teaching, when I would give a test, I would want students to be able to like just express their own views as to about the material that we had covered. And now, later in life, no, I just want them to repeat back to me what I told them. And so the question is, in one view that we have encountered in the study sheet, the test would obviously be, whatever you say, boss, that's what goes. The other view is saying, I'm testing you to see if you have the capacity to emerge as a self-actualizing human being with your, and to be able to express your own particular viewpoints and perspectives. You know, it's fascinating that within biblical Hebrew, there is no word that we would translate it into English as obey. There's no biblical Hebrew word that means obey. The closest we get to it is shema, to listen, to be attentive, to be attuned, if you will. And that attunement isn't so that we can repeat back verbatim what the other person has just downloaded to us. In the real essence of Jewish education is not to receive information and regurgitate it. It is to be stimulated to upload wisdom and insights that we have been carrying with us since we were born.
I like the interpretation, but in Hebrew, I remember the word mishpatim and chukim. And that, in my mind, those two words have an implication of obey, you know, or else.
All right, so real quickly, again, in Hebrew, the word for education is chinuch. And that, you know that word because you know Chanukah, which comes from the same Hebrew root. And what that word really means is dedication. And it means to dedicate something to the purpose for which it came into existence. You're dedicating a home to now be what it was meant to be, which is a place of shalom, of peace, of indwelling, of harmony. And so the notion of education in that sense is to dedicate the child for the purpose to which that child came into existence, not to merely repeat what a teacher tells that child. Okay, all right. So Mark Thompson and then David Phillips. Yeah.
I'd like to follow up a little bit more on this notion of testing with a little bit of a twist and tie it into Yitro. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the word in Hebrew, menaseh, to try, is a derivative of naseh. And I'm thinking of Yitro, because Yitro probably is the first, I think he's probably the first to give Moses advice as a father. And he, in a sense, is preparing Moses to be tested and the Israelites to be tested by God. And I think Yitro is a very poignant character to me. First of all, for Moses, he must have been a father for him. He was a father, and Moses didn't know his real father. So Yitro was his father. And I like, although it's not stated, I don't believe, but you get the understanding that Moses was very accepting of Yitro's advice to let go of some of your authority and let others decide on matters that are not quite as important. So he's testing Moses in a way, preparing Moses, I think, for a larger test. And I think Yitro for me is like a father figure that all of us, even those of us who've lost our fathers, are always searching, I think, for that father figure that we miss. And I love Yitro.
Mhm.
That's beautiful.
Me too.
That's beautiful, Mark. Here's what you inspired me to think about, which is that Yitro, and first of all, it's so significant that this moment of revelation in Torah is named after Yitro, this Midianite priest, right? And And what Yitro does, as you've pointed out, is he transforms Moses from the way he had been living and acting
Yeah.
as part of a transformation of the nation itself, to begin to spread out that sense of responsibility from a single point to multiple points. And that in a sense is foreshadowing what's going to happen at Mount Sinai, that moment of revelation, where the goal isn't to have a single point of authority and responsibility. It's to begin to spread that out among an entire people. So thanks very much for drawing. Appreciate that.
Sure.
David Phillips. And go ahead and unmute.
My comment is just that testing from a teacher's point of view can be a very effective way of teaching.
Go ahead, say some more.
I'll pass.
Oh, honey. Oh, sweet.
Because as I wander down that path, I'm thinking, well, a lot of it is just nailing down this stuff you're supposed to regurgitate at a deeper level when you have to put it on the test. But another piece of it is that it engages with the questions. If it's a well-constructed test, it makes you engage with a question or an issue at a more visceral, more strongly motivated level than if it's just sitting there listening and maybe asking a question here and there. A little closer to the Zen master hitting you with a stick when you have the wrong answer.
Right.
And all answers are wrong.
Right. Thank you. Okay, let me go to Robert and then Richard.
Thank you. So what is the intent of all this? So, you know, we all speak from our own experience and our own understanding. To me, the bedrock of all of this is the love of God for his children. So how do the children learn to die to self and live in him? And, you know, I'm thinking of gold. There's a verse in the Baha'i writings. It says, O son of being, busy not thyself with this world, for with fire we test the gold, and with gold we test our servants. So the dross of gold is eliminated through testing.
Carol.
And we are always fighting our material, our animal, our biological nature. It calls constantly. But we're tested, I understand, to rise above that and to die to that self and to live in God's pleasure, whether we're Jews or Christians or Baha'is. To me, what that means is to die to that lower nature and live in his word. What did he say? That's what we must turn to. And that's what the covenant is, as I understand it. We turn to that word of God. And one of the reasons I have such a wonderful friendship is that we have an understanding that God loves us, and our function is to turn to him so we can learn how to serve and be good and so forth. So that is something that comes to mind. Testing is the grace of God, and it happens every day. And my understanding is that we have all through eternity to become better, because only God is infinite. That's my understanding.
Thank you so much, Robert. Very beautiful. And let me invite Richard and then David Leb. Yeah.
I just want to say that, you know, they fire teachers when the students don't perform on the test.
That's right.
So what's being tested here is God. And he continues to test him. And he continues to try to find ways through the centuries of getting us not just to learn the rules, but to understand the principles behind them and the love that it generates when we get and experience compassion. And the other thing is about the putting us under the mountain and what that might mean. And it just struck me that, you know, remember the cloud that protects us from the sun during the day, the blanket? So in the same way, all these things that we're trying to integrate and getting the principles to understand and treat each other well, they're all there. And you got to stay right here under the mountain until you get it. So the teacher is getting it tested as much as the student.
That's really
So
beautiful and
true.
profound. Going back to the architect Yitzhak of Abraham apparently being tested by God, an alternative way of understanding that is it's not really, as you were pointing out, God testing Abraham as it is Abraham testing God.
Yes.
To see, really, God promised that my progeny would be as multiple, as many as there are stars in the sky and sands in the sea. So how could my killing my son lead to that? So I'm going to go up to the top of the mountain to test this God to see if that's how that could possibly be the case. So David Leb, and then Cheryl, then Justin.
Okay, when you were going through your study sheet, the word test also jumped out at me too. And the question is, what does it mean? It's not like going to school and getting graded with A, B, C, D, but it could be something like a test to determine a person's strengths and weaknesses, as I think Van Gogh was kind of trying to test himself that way too, and he found that, from what you say, being a preacher was a weakness for him. That's not the way for him to go. So I'm thinking right now, I just came up with another word. I don't know if it's applicable or not, but what would you think of the word analyze? God analyzed each one of the people to see what they were.
That's fascinating if you want to put it in a kind of therapeutic context like that, to place someone under the guidance of someone who's skilled at placing someone else under stress as a way to have them emerge out of some constriction that's within them that's preventing them from living a full life, and a kind of guided stress to help them emerge free from what has somehow internally constrained them. And I think that's beautiful, Dave. And the image I have is this notion of what's happening here is the kind of pressure that is involved in giving birth, that kind of constriction that ultimately leads to a birth of a new life. So let me invite Cheryl and then Justin.
One of the images that came to my mind when you were talking about putting people under pressure is how diamonds are made. Because diamonds are carbon under incredible, incredible pressure. And then it occurred to me that coal is also carbon under pressure. It comes out in a different way. It's not as strongly acted upon as diamonds. And the other thing that came to my mind was that the proof of the pudding is in the eating, which is not the way that we tend to think of the term proof, but it is the older meaning that the reality of it, the goodness of it, the truth of it comes through when you experience it.
Wow. It's beautiful, Cheryl. And are we not also carbon-based beings as well as diamonds? So thank you so much. All right. Let me invite Margot, and then I'll get to Justin. Okay, so Margot.
Well, on a lighter, more secular note, it's Van Gogh's sister-in-law, Theo's widow, who had most of his works and kept submitting them and with rejection after rejection. So if it weren't for Theo's widow, we might not know who Van Gogh is today. And then secondly, if any of you are in a museum and see Starry Night, if you would just kindly remove it from the wall and mail it to me. Thank you.
Okay, Marco, thank you. This is recorded, however, so we We know that you're joking. Thank you. Okay.
We have a big puzzle of a Starry Night we can send you. It drove us crazy.
Let me invite Justin, please. Thank you.
The first thing I just want to kind of understand is in 2013, there are these little somics between each one, like they have like 1, 2, 3, 4 command. What is the somic? It's not a parak, it's a somic. What is it just means the sentence is done or something like that?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the other piece is like Shavuos is in like that's celebrated in May or June, and yet we're reading this parsha about. I mean, Shavuos is to this parsha, I suppose, as Pesach is to the previous. It's. I just wondered about that relationship or the symbolism there. That's.
Well, no, you raise a fascinating issue because the holiday of Shavuos is one that we really don't experience it is not really tied to the moment at Mount Sinai until a post-biblical discussion about it. It's primarily is meant to be a harvest festival, and it's not until the rabbis begin to discuss it that they begin to lay claim to it as the moment at which revelation happened. But you're giving, by raising that, you now have given us where we started, which is that the moment of revelation is not really about this single being's revelation to everyone else. It is really meant to be an instigation to a revelation within all of us. That I believe it was the great philosopher Emmanuel Levinas who said each one of us is a site of revelation, and so this notion that we're encountering here about this pressure, as Cheryl put it, this carbon, on the carbon-based materials, whether it's our cells or diamonds or coal, whatever, is to cause a new iteration of the self to come into the world. And so I just want to conclude by thanking everyone here for not only your own moments of going through pressure that help you become different and emerge, a truer self emerge, but that you all contribute to a holy kind of pressure where we help one another to become more expressive of what's really authentic within us, to become transformed into better people. And so I want to thank each and every one of you for helping me to learn to paint better. And I look forward to more pressure to our mutual and collective transformations so that we can bring what we were born with, the divine presence, out into the world even more. Thank you all very much. God bless you all. I look forward to our next gathering. Thank you.
And Rabbi, dear Rabbi,
Yeah.
if you have poetry in your heart and on the page, please share it. The arts are to share. You're so generous, but poetry is exquisitely beautiful when it's done well. And I'm not trying to press you too hard, but I would love to see that poetry that you write, seriously. And I think everyone here would enjoy that. This is a gift God has given, not to everyone, because poetry isn't for everyone, just like painting or dance isn't for everyone. But poetry can live hundreds and hundreds of years, unlike dance, for example.
Well, I throw it back to you and to all of us to use our opportunities for coming together to share more about the gifts that we bear. So God bless you all. Be well. See you next time.
He's also a good diplomat. We got out of that.
Yes, he got out of that pretty well.
I believe I got into it with all of us. So thank you, Robert.
I think that dance is called the sidestep.
Be well.
I think it's called humility, but I have a particular love for good poetry, so that's why and good hearts, and obviously you have that. So I'm sure this wonderful lady on your side will work on you.
Thank you all. Be well, everyone. God bless.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me
Thank
attend.
you.
Good night.